see the Rambam, where all of this will become clear in just a little bit. And Mishnah, which ultimately again has that they wrote it in, and ultimately it must be talking about a case of chutz. Ava almanas lo pasal, but almanas would not invalidate if included in the get. So I will say, what we have over here is something very interesting, which is now, after all of this discussion about Tanam and the get, Tanan and get, you have Rebbe coming along and saying, by the way, do not write any Tanai in a get. And if you write any Tanai in a get, by definition, that will invalidate everything. I'm saying, no. It depends on the nature of the Tanai. Ibai the other possibility is second line down from the top. Hey, I'm Aleph. Good thing. Thank you. Ibai Sema. The other possibility is, other possibility is talking about a Tanai after the Toref, and it reflects the view of everyone. The Rava Amar machlokes li'achar haToref. The machlokes will be ultimately if the Tanai is included after the Toref. The Rebbe says atul ifnei haToref. Rebbe is concerned ultimately again, lest you come to include a Tanai before the Torah. Rabbanan Savri lo gazrinan, and the Rabbanan hold that we are not concerned, right? The lo gazrinan atul ifnei haTorah. We are not concerned lest you come to include a Tanai before the Torah. Aval ifnei haTorah divrei hakol pasal. But if indeed you include a Tanai before the Torah, everyone will agree that Allah Chalamai said that would invalidate. Umas nisin diktani kisvu v'okimna b'chutz. And the Mishnah that discusses the writing of a Tanai, we must be talking about that it's a chutz, Rabbanan will say, lashon of chutz, aval almanas lo pasal, but almanas ultimately again would not invalidate. La'achra haToref Rabbanan, and that would be a case of after the Toref, and it would reflect the view of the Rabbanan. Good. So Tani Avua de Rabbi Avin Kamed Rabbi Zera. Kasav get. So we'll say we'll finish till the Mishnah, and then I'll show you the Rambam. So Tani Avua de Rabbi Avin Kamed Rabbi Zera. Kasav get al Tanai divrei hakol pasal. If you write a get with a Tanai, everyone agrees it's pasal. Divrei hakol pasal, everybody agrees that it's pasal. V'hamiflag pligi. We just saw that it's a machlokes. Elaima l'divrei hakol kasher. Okay, that's a switch. Rather, no. What it means to say is everyone agrees it's kasher. All right. V'hechi dami. What's the case? La'achar haToref. The case would be of a Tanai that is included in the get, but it is included after the Toref. So after the part of the get that is couple specific, ultimately, again, a Tanai could be kosher. V'leima harei pasal v'Rebbe. So ultimately, maybe you should say that it's pasal and reflects the view of Rebbe. Tana divrei hakol asni. So ultimately, again, I will say the lashon of the Tana is in a situation where everyone agrees. So kosher bepasal michalafle. So one could get confused. In other words, in the recording of the Brayse, it could be that there's a confusion between kosher and pasal. Harei divrei hakol lo michalafle. But ultimately, again, a lashon of divrei hakol that would not get mixed up. So I will say, so halacha l'maisa. How do we paskin? So I'll share with you a fascinating Rambam. So the Rambam here, actually there's a couple of Rambams from yesterday's daf also, but let me just start with this one. So this is Rambam Hilchos Gerushin, Perek Ches Halacha Daled. So listen to the lashon of the Rambam. So we'll say, so now we essentially, this, just you should know, this Mishnah, actually it doesn't really close out tonight, there's still more. Kasav HaTnai Beget, Achar Shegamar Lichtov Torf. So let me just take one step back. When dealing with a Tanai in Gittin, remember a Tanai can manifest itself in two ways. The classic way that we were dealing with really up until this point in time is a verbal Tanai. In other words, he's giving her a get, and it's just a regular get. There's nothing written or reflected in the document itself. So that's a much easier type of case. Why? Because we'll say, if the Tanai works, if it's a valid Tanai, great. If it's an invalid Tanai, then what? All you really have, well, if it's an invalid Tanai, then it can be void. But if it's a wrongful type of Tanai, technically speaking, the way to remedy it is, he can always take the get back and give it to her again. Where things become complicated is when a Tanai is written in the document itself. So that's what the Rambam is dealing with over here. That's our sugya now. Listen to this. Kasav ha-Tanai beget, achar shegamar lichtov toref haget, harei ze get kasher. So case number one is, if you write a Tanai in the get, and you're writing it after the Toref, ultimately again, the get is kosher. Fine, whether you write it before the signatures of witnesses, after the signatures of witnesses, it doesn't matter. If you're writing it after the Torah, you're fine. Avalim kasvu kodem Torah haget, afilu kasav al minas kach v'kach, hare ze safek gerishin. The Rambam paskins, anytime you write in a t'nai in the get, and ultimately again it's before the Torah. So Rabbi say, remember again, the Rambam says, even if it's a valid Tanai, in other words, even if the Tanai is fine, what's an example of a Tanai that everyone agrees is okay? This is your get on the condition you give me $1,000. It works. No one is going to contest the validity of that Tanai. But if you write that before the Torah, ultimately the Rambam says you're Safek Migureshes. It's not clear if it's an effective get. Why? But say, what's the problem? Sharei nishar lo zichus begufo shall get. Because also what he's doing is, he is establishing some level of zuchos, some level of entitlement in the actual, in the kishkas, right, in the meat of the get. The toref is the meat of the get. The toref is the ikar. In that part, the husband cannot create anything that is an entitlement to himself, because that's the chap of a get. But say, what does a get do? What does a get do? A get dissolves a marriage. By including a t'nai in the Torah, what the husband is doing is he's creating some level of personal entitlement in that ikar part of the get that is supposed to dissolve the very marriage itself. Therefore, the Rambam says that halacha l'maisa, it's safek megureshes. So very interesting. Okay, there's more to it. But l'maisa, we'll leave that for now. All right, if we have time today, I'll go back to a couple of other interesting sugyas that we did yesterday, but let's first cover a little bit of ground over here. Says the Mishnah. Good, I will say that closes out that sugya. So some interesting cases as well. Right, Reuven gives Rachel a get. He says, this is your get. You are permitted to every man, except to my father and to your father. Okay. To my brother and to your brother. To an eved or to an idolater. Kasher. Now both say, the come down in all of these cases is these are men, she can't marry anyway. She can't marry anyway. So the Mishnah says the Tanai is not introducing any new level of prohibition. She couldn't marry these guys anyway. Therefore, such a Tanai ultimately again is fine. In other words, it's pretty much meaningless. It's meaningless. Doesn't impact the get. Fine. Hariat mutaris l'chol adam. If ultimately again he says to her, you are hereby mutaris to any man. Ella almana l'kohen gadol. That I will say, let's assume for a moment, by the way, that when Rachel was married to Reuven, this was their second marriage. Beforehand, Rachel was married to Yaakov, and Yaakov died. So she came into her marriage already with the status of an almana. So he says to her, you are hereby permitted to any man, except as an almana you can't marry a kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedyot, or now as a divorcee you can't marry a kohen, mamzeres unasina liyisrael, bas yisrael mamzer l'nasin. So we'll say, essentially what he says to her in these cases is like this. You can't marry a kohen gadol because you're an almana. You can't marry a regular kohen because you're a grusha. You can't marry a mamzer. You can't marry a nasin. So I will say, so technically speaking, these are all people to whom she is prohibited to marry anyway. But if he stipulates this, v'chol mishei shalav kiddushin, I will say, remember again, we paskin that kiddushin tofsin b'chayvei lavin. We paskin that if you have a marriage that is punishable by a lav, a prohibition, even though you're not allowed to do it, if you did it, ultimately, it works. It works. So we'll say, so in this case over here, what he's doing is he's making a Tanai. What's the Tanai? You are permitted to marry any man except the men who are usher to you through a lav. I will say, if you make such a Tanai like that, pasul. Ultimately, again, the get is pasul. I will say, now why is the get pasul? See, what's the distinction between the first case and the second case? In the first case, he is making a Tanai that she can't marry men with whom she cannot affect kiddushin, right? In other words, Rachel can't marry her father. She can't marry her father-in-law. She can't marry her brother-in-law. These are ervas, right? These are rayas cases. These are kares cases. So kiddushin does not take effect in any case of kares. So therefore, he's not introducing anything new because she couldn't marry these men anyway. Masha'enkin, in case number 2, these are relationships that are punishable by a lav. Technically speaking, as much as you're not allowed to affect marriage in these cases, if you did, it works. If an almana marries a kohen gadol, does the marriage work? Marriage work? Sure, don't wish him a mazel tov, right? But lamaisa, it works, right? Grusha marries a kohen, it works. All of these cases, they work. They're usher, but at the end of the day, they work. So if he legislates, right, if he makes a tanai saying that she can't marry one of these men, it invalidates the get. Says the Gemara, so the general rule of the Reisha comes to include anyone else who is punishable by kares. Klala de Seifa, ultimately again the klala of the Seifa, and comes to include any other cases of men who are just punishable by a lav. Kigon Amoni, Moavi, Nesini, Mitzri, Ve'adomi. So by Minei Rav Nachman, we find, we'll say some interesting cases. Chutz mikidushe katan mahu. We'll say, this is interesting. What happens if Reuven says to Rachel, you can marry any man you want except for Shimon. And we'll say, Shimon is 5. Shimon is 5 years old. You can marry anyone you want except Shimon. So on one hand we can say, look, he's not really prohibiting anything. Why? Because you can't marry Shimon anyway, he's 5 years old. So at the end of the day, he's not really prohibiting anything. On the other hand, one day he will be of marriageable age. So maybe we look at the fact that one day when he does become of marriageable age, he is precluding his wife from marrying a man, which is fundamentally, remember again, anytime a husband prohibits his wife from marrying someone, that is a psul, that is an invalidation in the divorce, in the get. Remember again, the whole chap of a get is that now hariat muteres l'chol adam. You're permitted to anyone. So I will say, so isn't this a fascinating question? So how do you look at the katan case? Do we see on one hand, right now he's a katan, so therefore the husband isn't really prohibiting anything. On the other hand, one day, katan gadol yiyeh, right? One day, he's going to be an adult. So Lamaisa, at that point, he is prohibiting something to his wife. So what's talacha? So the Gemara said, let's analyze this. I'm related to Nisua. So the Gemara says the truth is you could go ahead and you could actually extrapolate this from a different case. Listen to this. Ketana miskarashes b'kedusha avia. We'll say if you have a situation ultimately again where a ketana, a young girl, a minor, was married off by her father. What's ta'alacha? She has the ability to receive a get. Rashi points out over here, kitana miskareshes im kibla gita la'achar misasavia. So let's say again you have a kitana, father married her off, now the father died, she could receive her own get. She could receive a get, right, and get out of this marriage. So the Gemara says, so amai v'haba ina v'yatzavahaisa, but I don't understand, how is that possible? Ultimately, I will say only a woman who is capable of getting married is capable of getting divorced. So therefore, again, this girl is not capable of getting married. In other words, on her own, she's not capable of getting married. She's only married because the Torah gives her father the right to marry her off. If she's not capable of affecting Kiddushin, how is she able to receive her own get? To which the Gemara says, Ella, Asya lechlal avia. Rather, I will say what we look at her is that since one day she will reach the level where she will be capable of receiving kiddushin, she'll become a gidola. So therefore, again, ultimately we allow her to receive her get now. In other words, we look at her potential. Since one day, ultimately, again, she's going to reach the level where halacha l'maisa, she is able to receive the get, or receive kiddushin, we allow her to receive get now. Which I will say tells you what? When we look at potential. We look at potential. So I will say, you see here what's happening, just to zero in on this case over here. You have a girl, we'll just call it Kitana. She is married off by her father to a man, okay? Mutter, that's right, that is the biblical right that the Torah gives a father to marry off his minor daughter. So far everything fine. But now the issue is father dies, and she wants out of this marriage, or he wants out of this marriage. So the halacha is he can give her a get. But I will say, but how could he give her a get? Remember again, Gittin and Kiddushin, marriage and divorce, are two sides of the same coin. I know that sounds strange, right? But Lamais, again, halachically, the processes are two sides of the same coin. And therefore, what we say is, only a woman capable of affecting Kiddushin has the ability to affect divorce. Well, in this case over here, this girl's a Ketana. She doesn't have the ability to affect Kiddushin. If that's the case, she shouldn't have the ability to receive a get. So what do we say? Since one day she's going to reach the age where she can enter into Kiddushin, we allow her to receive the get now as well, based on her potential. Which, by the way, is an incredibly fundamental, yesodistic idea in terms of the power of potential. I would say that sometimes the power of your future potential allows you to accomplish things in the present as well, right? If you believe in your potential, even if it's not yet actualized, you have the ability to accomplish things in the here and now. Because we know that one day this girl, this Ketana, is going to become a Gedola, we allow her to receive her get now. So we'll say, right, since one day I know I'm going to have potential to do something, that knowledge of future potential gives me present power. Future potential gives present power. So again, looping back over here, so too we would say the same idea over here, that when husband says, right, Reuven says to Rachel, you are divorced, Adam chutz mi Shimon. Shimon is 5 years old. So on one hand we can say, well, right now he's 5. Husband didn't prohibit anything. But Lamaisa we see that no, since one day Shimon is going to become a gadol, husband, we look at potential. Husband is going ahead and limiting something. Ultimately, again, so too over here, even though right now all Reuven is doing is prohibiting her to marry a katan who she couldn't marry anyway, since one day this katan is going to be a gadol, this is considered to be something lacking in the get, and the get will be invalid. Next, chutz minan oladim mahu. So I'll say interesting case. Reuven's divorcing Rachel, and Reuven says to Rachel, you are permitted to every man except for anyone who will be born. Okay, so in other words, he's prohibiting her from marrying anyone who's going to be born after the time from the time the get is given and on. So mahu hashta mihu lo isyalit. So on one hand, no one's been born yet, right? So Lamaisa, again, Reuven hasn't really gone ahead and, in other words, no one has been born yet, so to speak. In other words, that like he hasn't prohibited anyone who is currently in existence. On the other hand, Odilma Asidi Yaldi, people will be born, right? So in other words, Lamaisa, is he prohibiting her from marrying people? The answer is, in the moment, right this second, no. But Lamaisa down the road, absolutely. Amalei to Nisua. So he said we learn this. So also remember again, the Mishnah said that if halacha Lamaisa, the husband prohibited his wife from marrying an Eved, right? Eved Kanani. This is your get on the condition you don't marry an Eved Kanani or a Gentile or Novi Kochavim. So I will say. So remember again, the Mishnah said that's fine. That actually does not undermine the get. But whatever. But one second. Im Isa Eved va'Ovi Kochavim nami avidi demegairi. But one second, we should say that should be a problematic condition also. Why? I'll say the Eved or the Ovid Kochavim could always convert. So we should say you shouldn't be able to prohibit her from marrying an Eved or an Ovid Kochavim because Lamai said they could always convert. So again, the fact that we don't say that indicates to us what? That Lamaisa, we're not choshesh for future things. So too over here, we should say that if he says to her, this is your get on the condition that you don't marry anyone who is born, we shouldn't worry about such a condition. That's a future condition also, shouldn't worry about it. To which the Gemara says, no. Hanach lav liyirei kaimi, hani leis layudei kaimi. There's a very big difference, I will say. It's the normal course of action that people are born. It's not the normal course of action, right? That an Eved or an Oved Kochavim convert, right? That's not the norm. Chutz mi bala. So fine. So we'll say. So therefore, again, sa'alocha l'maisa. Fine. So the Gemara seems to indicate that actually would be a problem. Chutz mi bala mahu. What happens if Reuven says to Rachel, "This is your get." On the right, if you're permitted to every man, all right. Except for your sister's husband. And I will say now. Remember, at the time of the divorce, Rachel can't marry her sister's husband anyway, right? Why? Because a man can't be married to two sisters. It's asur. So here, so interestingly enough, here the husband is right. Reuven is assuring his wife to someone who is already asura to him. I'm sorry, who she is already asura to. So mahu hashtam yalochazir. Like on one hand, right now, right. So lamaisa Rachel cannot marry her brother-in-law. On the other hand, odil mozimnin demesa chosa v'chazila. On the other hand, maybe Rachel's sister will die. Now, I both say if Rachel's sister dies, she would be permitted to marry her brother-in-law. Right? In other words, the prohibition to marry two sisters is only when they're alive. But Lamaisa, if a man is married, right, to a woman, he can't marry his sister, but if his wife dies, he's allowed to marry her sister. So the Gemara says, Amrlei tinisua le'eved u'le'oved kochavim. To which the Gemara says, I remember again this Mishnah's case, husband says to his wife, this is your get, right, and you're permitted to everyone except for an Eved and an Ovid Kochavim. So the Gemara says, Eved va'Ovid Kochavim, so nami avidi demegairi. I will say, ultimately again, you could have a situation where they could convert. So in other words, the point the Gemara is making over here is, the question is, here's the fundamental question. When a husband goes ahead and makes these conditions, essentially, do we look at what the condition is now, or do we look at what it could become in the future? Right? So for example, over here in this case, he says, this is your get, you're permitted to everyone, except for your brother-in-law. Your brother-in-law. So right now, the husband is not prohibiting anything because she's already asura to the brother-in-law. On the flip side, if Rachel's sister dies, the brother-in-law becomes someone who is permitted to her, right? And now effectively becomes prohibited because of the Tanai and the get. So do we look at what it is now, or do we look at what it's going to become? So the Gemara wants to bring a raya. The fact that, remember again, the Mishnah's case, where the husband says, this is your get, you're permitted to everyone except for an Eved and an Oved Kochavim. Now we'll say, right now, Eved, Oved Kochavim, could she marry them? No. But what could happen? They could convert. Now, the fact that the Mishnah doesn't seem to take that into account indicates to us what? That we only look at what is, not what will become. To which the Gemara says, here's the difference. Gerus lo shchicha, misa shchicha. Ultimately, again, conversion, uncommon. Death, very common. Death, very common. So therefore, halacha l'maisa will say death, very common. So therefore, again, is there a possibility that Rachel's sister is going to die, and therefore, again, her brother-in-law suddenly becomes available, and now as a result of the Tanai and the get, Rachel can't marry him? Yeah, that's actually not a far-fetched case. So because of that, halacha l'maisa, if he were to say, except for your brother-in-law, it would actually be a problematic condition in the get. So I will say, and again, this becomes the fundamental tension about whenever you have one of these Tanai, where right now, the Tanai doesn't actually prohibit anything to her, but ultimately, again, it could down the road prohibit something to her. So how do we look at that? So I will say, so this is an important distinction that the Gemara is making, is essentially, we have to look at what's common/probable versus uncommon and improbable. So for example, conversion is going to be uncommon, improbable. That's why Allah, if he says to her, this is your get, you're permitted to everyone except for an Eved and an Ovid Kochavim, we don't say, well, 1 second, one day they may convert. Now, that is uncommon, improbable. Versus, you can't marry your brother-in-law, which right now is usher, but it's not uncommon and improbable that the sister dies and suddenly this man becomes permitted. That would be a problematic thing. I will say, I also mentioned to you that this line over here is actually very profound. Gerus lo shchicha, misa shchicha. Right? Conversion is uncommon. Death is very common. I will say, what's the power of conversion? The power of a ger is, the Gemara says, ger shin is gayer kekatan sheno ladami. When a person converts, ultimately again, like a rebirth. Let's say gerus is often everyone undergoes a gerus, right? Every single time a person reinvents themselves, there's a gerus there, right? Gerus represents a process where a person chooses to totally, fundamentally, and comprehensively reinvent themselves, right? A person can be born Jewish, but still undergo a gerus, right? Every single time you choose to reinvent yourself, that is a quasi-gerus, that is a quasi-conversion. And the Gemara is highlighting a fascinating dynamic of the human condition, right? Gerus lo shchicha. Because even though we have the ability to reinvent ourselves, unfortunately, we often don't take advantage of that opportunity. Gerus is not, you know what is shchiach? You know what is shchiach? Misa, death. Now, I will say, what is death? What is death? So death is living in an unchanged state. So I will say, if you think about this just a moment, right? The scariest part of death, right? We believe in Olam Haba. So for we believe in the world to come. So for us, what's the scariest part of death? The scariest part of death is like your assets are frozen, right? In other words, that when you die, whatever you've accomplished in this life, that's what you have, right? You can't get any more mitzvos. There's no more growth. There's no more change. There's no more aliyah. Once you die, that's it. Whatever you accomplish in 120 years, that's what you got. That's the scariest part of death, right? Once death comes, there is no reinvention. Once death comes, there is no more gerus. Once death comes, there's no more growth. So I will say it's so profound. The Gemara is saying over here is misa shchicha, right? Death is pretty common. Death is pretty common in life also, by the way, right? A lot of people are dead even when they're alive. It doesn't mean they're doing bad things. Just a lot of people just flatline in life. We just go through life and kind of like, all right, this is what I've established. This is the baseline. This is where I am. And I'm just going to coast my way through. That's pretty common. Gerus lo shchicha. Well, so you know what's uncommon? What's uncommon is conversion. What's uncommon is finding people who have the koach, who have the willingness, who have the power to reinvent themselves over and over and over again. Now, lo shchiach doesn't mean impossible. Doesn't mean impossible. It just means uncommon. We'll say, what a profound statement in the Gemara, right? So reinventing oneself is so uncommon. Living a life of death, of just flatlining, that's very common. Let's say something to really take the heart, especially as we enter into Chodesh Elul, Yamim Noraim, which is the season of Gerus. It's the season of Gerus, right? It's the season of reinvention. Let's lead lives of Gerus and not lives of Misa. Incredible. Chutz miznuseich mahu. We'll say, listen to this. What happens if Reuven says to Rachel, ultimately, again, this is your get, and it's your get, except you can't engage in immoral behavior. Okay, so what he says is, in other words, you can't engage. You can't engage in znus. So what's the halacha? So mahu benisun haloshir. On one hand, he's not prohibiting her to marry anyone, right? Oh, so in other words, there's no limitation in terms of who she can marry. Oh, dilma shir bevia. On the other hand, I will say what he has done is he's curtailed her sexual activity. And maybe that's problematic in the get as well. Some like Taniso, we learned this. Li'avu la'avicha. As well as I remember again, the Mishnah said, if he makes a Tanai saying, you're permitted to everyone except for your father and my father. So the Gemara says, remember, the Mishnah said that's not a problematic Tanai because she can't marry them anyway. Obamai, what's the case? Well, say first white line at the bottom. Ilema b'nisuin, if we're talking about nisuin marriage, abba v'avicha b'nei nisuin, she can't marry her father or his father. Elalav biznus. Rather, I will say some of it was znus. And it was only a case of Abba and Avicha that it's not a problem. Hala achar shir. But for anyone else, it would be a problem. So I will say, you see from here that if he were to say to her, this is your get, on the condition that you don't engage in any immoral behavior, curtailing her sexual activity, even though he's not limiting her marriage prospects, it would still be problematic. The Gemara said, maybe we're talking about a case where he's prohibiting marriage to her father or to his father. Da'avar ve'insiv. Right? Fine. So both say, the Gemara said, maybe not. Maybe it is talking about marriage. Okay, fine. So therefore, both say that one ultimately, again, is still open-ended. Chutz mishalo kidarka. All right, an interesting case here. Let's say he says to her again, you are permitted to any man, right? The only thing you can't engage in is bia shalo kidarka. So mahu. Bikidarka haloshir, on one hand, in normative sexual activity, he has not curtailed her. Al dilma mishkave ishaksiv. On the other hand, the Torah allows both for bia kidarka, bia shalo kidarka, and therefore, again, his curtailing of this activity is problematic. Chutz mi'afaras nidarecha. What happens if he says to her, well, listen to this, you are permitted to every man except no other man could annul your vows. Interesting, right? Mahu b'nisun haloshir. On one hand, he has not in any way prevented her from remarrying. O dilma ishay kimeneve shefer enuksiv. On the other hand, annulment of vows is a fundamental right of a husband, and he's holding that back. Chutz mitruma sayech mahu. Right? So listen to this. He says to her, if you marry a Kohen, ultimately again, you can't eat truma. He can't eat truma. So now, b'nisun haloshir, o dilma kinyan kasbo ksiv. Also, on the other hand, one hand, he has not withheld anything. Ultimately, again, from her from marriage, but on the other hand, again, that's a function of being married to a Kohen. Chutz mirushasayich mahu. We'll say, what happens if he says to her, with the exception of your inheritance? In other words, your new husband, you can marry anyone you want, but he's not going to inherit you. Mahu b'nisun haloshir. On one hand, he has not held back anything when it comes to marriage. O dilma l'sheiro v'yara shasaksiv. Okay, chutz mikidushayich b'shtar mahu. We'll say, what happens if he says you can marry anyone you want, but when you get remarried, your new husband cannot affect kiddushin with a shtar. We'll actually see this in Meretz Hashem in just a couple of days. Right? There are three ways to affect kiddushin: kasef, money; shtar, document; and bia, relations. So let's say he says to you, you can marry anyone you want, but you can't get remarried with a shtar. Okay. In other words, on one hand, on the other hand, she has two other ways in which to affect kiddushin, either with money or with bia. On the other hand, again, I'll say again these three mechanisms of affecting kiddushin, kesef, shtar, and bia, are a package, and therefore again he can't withhold any of them. We'll say the answer to all of these cases, teku. So I will say, what you begin to see, and now it comes together, this is why Rebbe said before, on the bottom of Pei Daled Amud Beis, Rebbe said, if you make a Tanai in the get is possible. The get is possible. Right? They will say, because what do you begin to see? Tanaim are complicated. They're really complicated, right? And what's considered to be ineffective, right? Chutz, almanas, this, that. That's why, again, we'll say, by the way, contemporarily, we do not allow any Tanai in the get. We do not allow any Tanai to be written in a get. We do not allow any Tanai to be articulated in a get. And in fact, again, we go ahead and we explicitly make the husband say that he is giving this get Tanai free. Tanai free, right? We want that articulated because you begin to see it's complicated, right? So I will say, listen to that. Right? Look at all the variables we have. Chutz, right? Chutz, almanas, before the Torah, after the Torah, in writing, verbally, whole list of teku tanaim, right? A tanai that doesn't have an impact now, but can have an impact down the road. So I'll say, so that's why, again, you can see whenever you have a tanai, really, you're playing with fire. You're playing with fire. Now, are there ways to have conditions with the get? There are. But essentially, again, what we do is, I will say, so this happens all the time, because you could have a couple that is working on a whole marriage agreement, right? And again, it is common in divorce that you have to have an agreement, and there's a back and forth, and there's negotiations, of course, but those things are done outside of the context of the get. See, I will say, what's interesting to note is from the perspective of Chazal, it's clear that often divorce agreements or negotiations were kind of done in the process of the get. Today, what we try to do contemporarily is, the get is the get. The get is the get, right? And when a man wants to divorce his wife, he should give his wife a get, and really a get should not be part of negotiations, right? Then there are negotiations. Okay, there has to be a divorce settlement. There might be different machloksim over here. So that has to be dealt with, but again, outside of the context of the get. All right, Mishnah. Shabbos says this, Gufo shall get. I will say this is fascinating, by the way. It's absolutely riveting and fascinating that we are doing this at the end of the Masechta, right? By the way, like, what's in a get, right? What's in a get? So this is fascinating. Again, Gufo shall get. I will say, what is the guf of the get? What is the essence of the get? Hariat mutaras l'chol adam. You are permitted to anyone. Right, you're permitted to anyone. You are permitted to every man. So we'll say. So according to the Tanakama, that is the get. That is it. Hariat muteres l'chol adam. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda and Beis. Rabbi Yehuda says as follows. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Vidan or Vidin, Diahavi lechi minai. So Rabbi Yehuda says, no. You have to actually include a lot more wording in order to make it effective. And I will say, we're going to see they're not really arguing on what the wording is. What they're arguing is what's the primary wording. So Rabbi Yehuda says, you have to say like this, Vidan diahavi lechi. Vidin, really it's vocalized as vidin. And this, Diahavi lechi, will be for you, minoi, from me, Sefer Teruchin, a book of banishment, V'igeres Shavukin, and a letter of abandonment, the get Peturin, and a get ultimately again of releasing you, lemehach, for you, le'esnaspa lechol davar de'isyatzmin, to marry any man that you want. So, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you need much more explicit lashon that this document dissolves any last vestige of marriage. Right? According to the Tanna Kama, you just need to say, Hariat mutaris l'chol adam. Now we'll say, by the way, according to the Tanna Kama, this goes back to the fact that marriage and divorce are two sides of the same coin, right? How do you affect marriage? Hariat mikudeshes li. Right? How do you affect divorce? Hariat mutaris l'chol Adam. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. You need that statement, but you need a lot more explicit language in the get. Guvo shall get shikhr. What's the right? What about a get shikhr? Remember again, get shikhr. Now we're switching gears a little bit. Get shikhr is document of emancipation for an eved Kinani. Hariat baschorin, hariat liatzmeich. Either a lashon ultimately again of you are free, or you now belong to yourself. So the Gemara says pshita. Amar lo leishta hariat baschorin la amar velo klum. Now we'll say if a man says to his wife, let's say Reuben wants to divorce Rachel, and he says you are a baschorin, or he writes in a document you are a baschorin. So we'll say it's pashut, that is not a get. But we'll say why is that not a get? Why is that not a get? She was a baschorin anyway. We'll say a married woman is a baschorin, a married woman is a free woman. So telling her you're a baschorin, ultimately again lo amar velo klum. Amar lo l'shivchaso hariat mutaris l'cholad lo amar velo klum. And obviously, if a man says to a shivcha, ultimately again you are permitted to any man. That statement is also meaningless, right? Because obviously, again, a shivcha is not married; she's permitted to any man she wants. Amar lo leisha hariat la'atzmeich mahu. So I will say this is interesting. What about if Reuven says, I will say, by the way, I just want to be clear. Even though we're using these lashonos of he's saying, obviously, a get is a document, right? A get has to be in writing. So what we're asking over here is what happens if halacha lamaisa, he uses these lashonos in writing. So what happens if he writes a document, hariat liatzmeich, you are hereby for yourself, or hariat, behold, you are liatzmeich, in your own domain, right? Or in your, what's the right way to translate this? On your own. Good, or on your own. But it's liatzmeich means like, you belong to you. You belong to you. Right? Li'atzmeich. Yeah, you belong to you. So now, so what was it? What's the effect of that statement? Or that get? So now, legamri kamarla. So we'll say, is he saying that, look, now I have no rights in you, so to speak? So lemaisa again, that is a lashon of divorce, right? Because a husband does have rights, right, within his wife or within her property. So now is he saying like, I have no rights in you, and therefore halacha lamaisa, again, rights is the wrong word, but no entitlements, right? There's no relationship, and therefore that is lashon of divorce. Or maybe I will say, hariat liatzmeich is another way of saying, right, you keep your earnings, I'm not supporting you. Right? You get to keep your earnings. Maybe it's an earnings statement, not a marriage statement. Tashma disnan. Gufo shall get shechrar. What is the guf, right? What is the body of a get shechrar, document of emancipation? Hariat baschorin, you are hereby free. Hariat liatzmech, you hereby belong to you. Uma avda de kanele gufei. Now, when it comes to an eved, where ultimately the master does actually own the person of the eved. Ki amale hariat liatzmech kane gufei. The lashon of hariat liatzmech works. Isha the lo kane gufei lo kol shekain. Now, I will say this is interesting. Remember, it's a fascinating observation. If hariat liatzmech works by a shifcha, by an eved, right? So let's remember again, what's the relationship between an adon, a master, and the eved, right? The master owns the eved. Literally, again, you own your eved. If a lashon of hari atli atzmeich, right? You belong to you, allows an eved to go free, where the adon owns the body, then certainly hari atli atzmeich should be an effective lashon of divorce, where the husband doesn't own the body of the wife, right? The husband has certain maybe entitlements or certain rights, right? But not in the body, right? But ultimately, again, in like the property or other things. So if that lashon is strong enough to affect emancipation of an eved, it certainly should be strong enough to affect divorce as well. Incredible. What happens if a person says to his eved, I no longer have anything to do with you? Right? I have no involvement in you. No involvement in you. Mahu, what's the halacha? We'll say, does that work? Tashma desanya hamocher avdo li'ovid kochavim yatzel lecherus. We saw this before. If a person sells his eved to a Gentile, the eved goes free, right? We penalize the master. The eved goes free. V'tzarech get shikhr me Rabbi Rishon, but ultimately again, the eved still requires a get shikhr from his original Jewish master. Amr Sheming Gamliel says, when is that? So remember again, this is because remember we don't want a Jewish master selling his eved Kanani to a Gentile master, right? Because Lamaisa again, it's mafkia him and prevents him from performing mitzvahs. So ultimately again, so therefore the eved goes free, but he still requires a get shikhr. Amr Sheming Gamliel, when is that so? B'shelo kasav alav ono. When the first master, the Jewish master, didn't write a shtar ono, ksav ono, aval kasav alav ono, but if he wrote a shtar ono, zer shechru, that's his shechru, that's his emancipation document. My ono, we'll say, what's a shtar ono? So the Amrav Sheish says, the kasav lach tebarach mimenu. So the first master writes to the eved, if you run away from your new master, I have nothing to do with you. So Rabbi say, what do you see from here? You see from here that the lashon of Einli Esek Becha, I have no involvement in you, is in fact a proper lashon of shechrer, a proper lashon of emancipation. Incredible. Weiter. Rabbi Yehuda Omer v'don dehavi lechi minoi sefer terich and meger shvukin. Rabbi Yehuda said it's not just enough to write hariat mutaras l'chol adam. You need to have a more expansive lashon, right? As we saw in the Mishnah. So what are they arguing about? Rabbanan Savri yadayim she'ena mochichos having yadayim. So Rabbanan say, remember again, this goes back to our Nadarim days. The Rabbanan hold that partial statements that are not explicitly clear but are clear enough work. V'afagav delo kasav la v'din muchacha milsa de b'hai gita kamagarishla. The Rabbanan feel that once you write hariat muteres l'chol adam, what else is happening here, right? In other words, I understand it's not a complete statement. It's not a complete statement, right? It's what we call yadayim she'en mochichos. It's not an explicit statement, or I should say, it's a partial, inexplicit statement, but it's clear what it is that you're trying to do. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, partial statements that are not explicitly clear don't work. And therefore, I don't know, yeah, that sounds like Gerushin, but why don't you just be more explicit? Just write out explicitly what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So the Imam wants to suggest that's the Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. Incredible. The kasav lavedon muchacha milsa de b'haygita kamagarishla, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda says it's only when you write the rest of the statement vidin dihavi lechiminai, the rest of it, that it becomes explicitly clear that this is a get. Avalo kasav lavedin amri b'dibura garsha ushtara raya ba'almahu. So Rabbi say this is very interesting. The challenge we have over here is if you don't write this whole vidin, this whole statement that Rabbi Yehuda has in the Mishnah, it sounds like maybe the husband is trying to affect the gerushin verbally, and the document is only coming as a shtar raya, right? As a document that proves that he divorced her. In other words, but that divorce is not actually happening with the get. It's only when you use the more explicit lashon of Rabbi Yehuda that it is clear how is gerushin being affected through the document itself. So we'll stop over here for today. We're going to continue with this, but this is a fundamental machlokes. So again, the Rabbanan will say, as long as the document says, Hariat mutaras l'chol adam, good to go. That's enough. Rabbi Yehuda, no, that is not enough. It has to go ahead and have the entire lashon, ultimately, again, also of V'din di havilechem inai sefer terechin v'geresh shvukin. We'll say the resolution of Mir Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach. All right, Chavran Zoom, have a great day, everyone. Come here and say, Chavran, who's getting started over here? Okay. Yeah, let's go, Chichak.
Hi.
Good morning.
You said that you could say for $1,000 on condition you give me $1,000 it works, but then you just said